Welcome back to Danny Rants. Like every week, we have a very special guest. But this guest could be the most special so far. We have one of the creators and founders of Onelove, one of the creators and founders of Stereosonic, and one of the creators and founders of Kiss FM. This is a long, rich history of music entertainment. One of the best to ever do it. Peter Raff, how are you today?
I'm pretty good, you know, back in Melbourne for a few weeks, and good old Melbourne weather coming back, you know, grey, rainy.
37 degrees yesterday.
Great for clubbing.
That's true. So as I just said in that little intro, your story is a long, long story of like working in the music industry. Where do you come from originally? Where are you born? Where did you grow up in Melbourne?
I'm a Melbourne boy, and you know, with great background, and I love going out, love my music, and that's probably where it all started. Just getting out and about as a young guy, and I think I was lucky enough to go to Greece quite often, and going there and hearing great music, and oh my God, how good is this? I wish this happens in Australia. And the clubbing that was happening at the time in Greece, and I remember being in the club there in Rhodes and hearing "The Only Way Is Up" by Yaz. And We Papa Girl rappers, and the vibe, the whole thing was like, oh my God, this is wow. You know, we haven't really got this yet in Australia. So I, after that holiday, I remember coming back, and, you know, I was working at a place called the Lager Bar, and I went back overseas. And I bumped into a guy called George Zagoulis, who was then the owner of Chasers.
Rest in peace.
Rest in peace. George said, "Oh, why don't you come and work for me? Come and, you know, my Saturday night. It's quite, you know, we need people to get this Saturday night going. You know, you're out and about all the time. I know you are. You know, I know the music." So we myself and a very good dear friend of mine, John Harrah, we'd been on travelling together, and we came back, and we started working on Hysteria at Chasers.
And how old were you at this point?
Ooh, I was probably 25.
And where were you going out before? So before you sort of started your first nightclub?
Before Subterrane, and I think Andy Sumter mentioned Subterrane in his. Subterrane was super cool. It was cutting edge, and also after that, Inflation, which I washed a few dishes at, and also hung out in the DJ booth and on the dance floor. So we loved, so that's sort of where I really, like, in the Melbourne scene, you know, there was a great bunch of people at Inflation that time, and Fab and Camillo and LGO were the guys running the place, and Alistair Kennedy was there, and then there was just it was just a great melting pot, super cool. Everything that cool was happening was at Inflation, believe it or not. But so I was really into the music, and George had said to me, come and run this night. And got there, which I met some great people, Grant Harrison and Darren Fishman and Eric Pipersberg were already there. And John Harrow and myself came in, and with all this, listening to great European club music, disco, house was just starting to happen, and they'd had guys like Paul Seedley there already, and between that and I think John Corse had been playing in Greville Street, Andy Van was just starting, and Frankie D. We put this lineup together, and oh my God, it just went bang. The whole, ecstasy was the new thing, and it was just like this amazing thing that happened, and the music, and you can still listen to a lot of that music today, and it's timeless music.
People still do. There's the event that's on next weekend coming that does fucking 9,000 people at the bowl, literally celebrating that style of music back in that genre.
Yeah, so it was timeless music, and I was there we got to a stage where we were so busy, and this is pre-casino. Casino wasn't open. We didn't have mobile phones.
So when was this sort of like mid-90s?
I'd walk the streets promoting. I'd go to unis. I was walking, doing my sidewalk talk.
Sidewalk talk, I love that.
So, it was all about, we had shopkeepers, hairdressers, everyone involved, and it became this great melting pot. It was stylish too. People dressed well, and there was a great love of the music, and it was just this great natural vibe. It wasn't pushed in your face, so we got Hysteria going, and and then Chasers as a club itself just came up. And, so suddenly there was, they had Delirium on Sunday, Hysteria Saturday, Express on Friday nights, which I'll talk about in a second, and there was a funk night and a rock night. Suddenly the place had 1,500 to 2,000 people every night.
5 nights a week?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was wow. It was a special time in the Melbourne history.
And what, was this like in the 90s?
Late 80s.
Late 80s, okay.
Yeah. So it got so busy that it attracted the attention of the police. So one night there on a Saturday, oh my God, we had so many people. There was people lined up Chapel Street as far as you could see. And, we had, the club was full. George, he'd sort of we kind of let a few too many people in the club, maybe.
You may be the first person to ever do that.
So anyway, I'll never forget this night. The police came in. They said, turn the music off, and they counted everyone out of the club.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was just, and I remember running up. Andy Van was on the decks at the time. Andy, play Fuck the Police. play it. So we played it and all that, and gee, that did not go down too well.
Oh, we used to do the same thing like back in the day. The cops used to come and do the head count because we'd heard about it. And we'd have people and be like, as soon as they walked in, anyone we knew, we'd send out the text message like, go out the back door. So they'd go and hide in the back door or hide in the cupboards and while the cops did the head counts.
Well, back then there was no text messaging.
Yeah, true.
There's no one had phones. You had to talk to people. So, look, after that, the police had really gone down hard on chases and numbers and all that.
Do you think it's because you played Fuck the Police?
Well, it just got harder and harder. They just didn't, So that was, but in that time, as I mentioned just before, there was a night called Express that we all sort of got involved in because it was about this new music called techno, and we had guys like Terence Ho and Willie Tell playing. I don't know if you probably don't.
No, I do. I know Willie Tell. I don't know Terence.
Willie was an amazing DJ.
Yep.
Wow.
It's like, kind of people say he's one of the best.
One of the
did
best,
it.
In the early days of techno. And of course, Richie was there too. Richie was actually Richie McNeil was a busboy at that time. And
what, at Chasers?
Yeah.
What? Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he then progressed into DJing. But, I can never, I remember walking the streets and telling people, hey, we've got this new music on Friday nights. You've got to come and listen. It's called techno. Because there was no other way to promote it. You did it word of mouth about this new style of music, which was it was just amazing to be part of that. You know,
Where was it coming from originally? Like obviously, you know, techno.
Detroit.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and Germany and stuff like that too?
Germany and Detroit, yeah.
It's because it's always fascinated me, like obviously, you know, styles now that just move through so quickly.
Yeah.
But like back then, like how the fuck did you even figure it out?
Early.
Yeah, well, and I'm guessing it was just records got sent over, someone picked it up, they started a collection, Richie and Willie start playing it. Like it would have been a long process for it to like infiltrate.
There was also, you know, HMC.
Yep.
DJ HMC, who was doing a similar thing in Adelaide. You know, and Melbourne and to an extent Adelaide had this great music culture going on, where Sydney had gone up a different path, playing lots of like happy hardcore. There was happy hardcore stuff going on, and Melbourne people were like they were just like, oh, they weren't into it.
Nothing's changed.
Nothing much has changed. I think Melbourne people, you know, they're right up there with, you know, loving quality music.
Yeah, definitely. I think so.
You know, and if it's a bit cheesy, forget it.
Yeah, and there's so many genres that have missed us. Like, you know, there's been like drum and bass, D&B, and just no one's listened to it here. And like everywhere else, it's massive.
Yeah, it's small amounts of
niches,
people.
yeah. And
niches.
then it's so like massive everywhere else in Australia, and like we just don't get it here. Like that's what I think makes it so special.
Yeah, it was a special time, you know, when, you know, all this new music coming out. You know, Tuesday down at Central Station Records, all the DJs, they'd be lining up Tuesday morning, you know, waiting for the new shipment that had just arrived. And, you know, guys like Corsi, Frankie D at the time, you know, they got the pick of the music. You know, the guys at Central would put stuff away. You know, there was another rest in peace, Guy Upire, who was a, you know, great house DJ, and he you know, like Frankie, you know, he'd pick out stuff Frankie like and John Corsett like.
That's sick.
Know, and, you know, they'd go through, you know, it's not like today where there's, you know, there might be 1,000 releases today in one day. There was, you know, maybe, you know, 20 or 30 records coming out.
And the guy working behind the counter.
England,
and the guy working behind the counter was your Spotify algorithm. He was saying, I know you like this style.
That's
I reckon
right.
you'll like this, this, and this.
That's exactly
So he
right.
becomes like a salesman who understands your genre.
Yeah, but, you know, it was, you know, don't forget, there'd be 3-4 copies in the country.
Yeah.
Melbourne got the pick and then Sydney got the stuff, you know, but there's 3 or 4 copies of these records.
I've heard DJs back in the day, they used to buy all 4 records at the time so that other people couldn't have it.
Well, maybe, but like, I you know, because if you wanted to hear, like, there was a radio show, I think it was on maybe Triple J, Paul Molinaro, and he was one guy. It was the only radio show at the time, and he would break he'd have records on. This is even early, like real early days. That's the only time you'd hear music. Otherwise, you'd have to find a party or go to a club that was, you know, playing this stuff. Otherwise, you're not going to hear it. You're just not going to hear it.
So Hysteria, does that eventually close down because of the police pressure? Or?
Well, look, I had actual, you know, George was getting, everything was tough. And I had an offer to move down to the Chevron, which I don't know if you remember.
I've never been there, no, but I'll tell you what, every single time I post anything, people ask me about it. So
okay. So Chevron had been, you know, had a lot of bands, had been a successful club, but it was going through probably one of its worst periods ever. And, I was a bit entrepreneurial, and I got offered to move down there, do a new Saturday night. And I was sort of not real happy at Chase's. It was just, the police had made it hard. George was grumpy. So myself and I got together with Jake the Snake Kagarkis, rest in peace
again, yeah.
And another guy called Ravi Krishnan. And we went to the Chevron and started a night called Insanity. And Insanity, my God, we thought we had done amazingly at Chase's, but when we went to the Chevron, it was just on the cusp of people starting to learn about electronic music. Before that at Chase's, 3 or 4 years prior, it was quite underground. You had to know, sort of, it wasn't out there a bit. But when we went to the Chevron, it had just gone that next level of we use the word commerciality or just people knowing it. I don't know what you want to call it.
But back then, right, so how did stuff get more commercial? Like, did radio pick it up, or, just sort of started to spread and people would listen to it? Because how did things become more mainstream?
No, it was still, look, we had a mate, Jake and Ravi were fantastic with a young crowd, and they'd been at the Talk Age doing a night on a Thursday, and they had a great connection with young promoters. So, and I had the more clubbier crowd with the crossover of the gay crowd as well. So how we worked it was like, I said, you get the young ones in early, I'll get the
serious clubbers in.
The serious clubbers who wouldn't go out till 12, 1 o'clock. Yet the young people, they were at the door at 9 o'clock. And we twisted the night around like that with, John Course came with me, Frankie D came eventually, Andy Van. And we had, because the Chevron was a big club with a number of rooms, I put all different styles of music in different rooms. I was the tastemaker when it came to the, music side of things, putting the night together. So, there was Guy Pye played in this trade bar, we called it, and he was he did his 2 or 3 hour sets when we had guests, but he was like the mainstay of that room. We put like a rave room because it was just starting all to happen too. So we had a rave room, the house room, the big club room, which, but we were, at its peak, we were doing over 3,000 people till 7 a.m. There'd be 1,000 people at 7 a.m. at the club.
And the Chevron was on Commercial Road?
Yeah.
Yep.
Commercial and St Kilda Road corner.
Yeah, now it's all apartments and houses, right?
So, they were like, that was just amazing. And
there was a fair bit of trouble down there at Chevron when you were running it. Like, there's a few famous stories about the door.
Oh, look, yes, no. You got 3,000 odd people every week. There's not going to be something going, but I won't go too much into all that sort of stuff. So, that Insanity at the Chevron, I think, was a real game changer into the scene commercialising into went to a different level of, wow, we've discovered this electronic music. which people didn't really know that much about it.
I'm guessing it's because you had the different rooms too. People would be able to be educated, so they go check out a room, start to like some songs.
Yeah, and then some people just hung out in their rooms.
Yeah, getcha.
And didn't look. I do remember one interesting thing we did do with it. There was a bar as you walk in downstairs, and it was the first non-smoking room. The government had something going on. I can't think what it was called back then. But so we pushed this room that for people who didn't want to be around smoke, non-smoking room. Of course, we were ahead of our time. Didn't really work.
Yeah.
But we gave it a go for probably 6 months, and it just didn't really, But you'd go in there, it was fresh air.
It's crazy to think that now. Hey, no one was going into the room without cigarette smoke covering it.
Yeah. So that was that was an interesting one we did there. But we had got we didn't have a lot of international DJs at that. It was really early. But I do remember having Paul Oakenfold play one night.
Wow.
And Paul was like a number one DJ in the world at the time.
Still huge now.
Yeah, well, he was he'd come off the Summer of Love in Ibiza. He was just the guy. He was one of the creators of a lot of what happened in Ibiza, getting all English crowds, getting Ibiza really happening. So he was on the Lemon tour with U2, and they'd happened to be on a Saturday night, and I made a few phone calls. Ended up, we got pulled to play after the U2 gig. So that's probably one thing about the night in Sandy I always remember. And the other thing, being at 7 a.m, 1,000 people there, and everyone, Melbourne had just really discovered ecstasy properly then as well, and
they've loved it ever since.
Yes, the room was full of ecstasy. It was just wow, and
So you turn the lights on, and they're not wanting to go home.
Tracks where Love Lives, Alison Limerick, Inner City, Kevin Saunderson, all that sort of music was just really just coming out, and it's just wow.
Was there recovery clubs at that point too?
So then,
next part,
Raff thinking, I said to the guys, I want to do a after party, and finding places with a license wasn't easy. So there's 2 or 3. I think we started at the Duke, which was on near Elmer Road in St Kilda there. Oh God, I remember that. It was wild because no one had ever seen a recovery before.
I'm imagining even talking to the venue owners back then. They'd be like, "What do you mean you want to bring people from somewhere from 7 a.m?"
So the great thing is that this pub, the Duke, we had a couple of meetings with the guy there. He was a real straight publican, didn't know anything. Yeah. We've got a 24-hour license. Yeah, no problem. Okay. So anyway, it was all word of mouth. Bang, straight away. There was people right on it. But the interesting thing about it too, when it was called Three Faces back then, which was a gay club, finished as well, which is on Commercial Road. Is it now? What's it now? Emerson?
Yeah, Emerson. Yeah, it was Market, and then
Yeah. So we'd finish at 7, and our crowd would come in, they'd finish. So then you've had this eclectic crowd of drag queens, the gay crowd, the clubbing crowd. And I remember looking around the room thinking, wow, there was some really, super cool people in there. And that was the start of that. And then our humble publican, who was at the time we thought straighty 180 sort of guy, within about 6 weeks he's dressing up in drag himself. So that was quite funny. And he got like right into it, maybe a little bit too much. But later on, not long after, we actually found out he didn't have a license. He'd actually lied to us. So,
what? So it was a legal recovery?
Yeah. But, St Kilda at 7 a.m. in the morning down the Elmer Road, which is usually kind of quiet sort of area, suddenly had clubbers parked in the streets, drag queens walking out, and I think it was a bit of a shock to the
local residents
back then, because it was on that side of St Kilda Road. It wasn't it was on the left side, so it was a bit more residential, and
It's kind of funny because the recovery thing, you explain that now. Even when I was going out to recoveries in sort of mid-2000s, it was much the same. The crowds were there was drag queens, there was clubbers, it was ravers, there was everything. Recoveries in Melbourne have always been this melting pot of everybody left over. But that's what I reckon makes them so special, it makes them so crazy, because it's you're meeting people that you normally wouldn't rub shoulders with in your normal club night that you go into at 1 a.m.
So anyway, word got out that this was sort of kind of happening, and we had to move. We had to move it. And it was like, oh my God. So the guy who owned Three Faces, just virtually across the road, had this a gay sauna, which was licensed and did have a 24-hour license called Subway. Subway was one of the best clubs I ever did. It was the way he'd set the place up. It was dark. And it had a 75-seat cinema. It had a couple of trains, carriages in there. It had a maze, and we ran the club quite dark. And it was like, wow. Yeah, and Danny Tenaglia at the time was his music, dark and dirty.
Techno, yeah.
It was so good. And it was, the guys, I think there was Simon Digby and Jason Digby played there. Dr. John, a guy called Dr. John. Oh, the doc, he'd play long sets, 4 hours, 5 hours, sweat, tops off. But that club was just wow.
And was that, so you ran it all night, all day, or was it just a recovery?
No, I'd come in at 5 a.m.
And what time would it run till?
4 in the afternoon.
Nice.
But this is a club that fits 1,000 people, maybe more.
Yeah, wow.
And as still no phones. This is word of mouth.
That's insane. That's awesome.
And it was just great music. Just, everyone was pretty,
Up and about.
Up and about, yes. Yeah. That's what we'll call it. And that those times were just like, wow. But, but it was at a time though to, it was a little bit scary.
Yeah.
In their way.
I guess because you there's no roadmap, right? Like you guys are creating the roadmap, like house and techno starting.
Well, I'm more on it was a period, when maybe a few bad boys might have been around too.
Yeah, okay, yep.
So it was always a little bit challenging.
Dealing with them at the door and stuff like
But,
that.
you know, I'd like to think we had kind of okay relationships, but geez, it was, you know,
Yeah.
some people were partying a bit too much.
And guns and stuff like that getting around.
And it was not, yeah, you just had to be at your wits.
Yeah.
You had to be on the ball.
So even as a promoter back then, because this was sort of in that 90s period there, underbelly time, right?
Raff.
Yeah.
You know,
You sort of didn't want them knowing your name, but too late they already did.
Hide.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah. And then, you know, that only had a short period too, because the owner had come into some financial difficulty, and it was which it is now, apartments. It was a great apartment site. So it was sold. We only had like 6 months.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was, wow. Jeez. It was.
Good.
And, you know, and it got to a stage where, you know, that's when I really noticed people, maybe a couple of hundred people were getting up in the morning and just coming.
Yeah.
So that's when that sort of stuff sort of started. Then.
And that's been a big thing in Melbourne too. Like people waking up, you know, getting ready and then rolling into recoveries, because some of the recoveries are better or more popular than the nightclubs.
I'd say out of 1,000, might have been 100, 150 maybe, may have got up in the morning and just came down, you know.
I call them cheaters.
And partied all day. Yeah. So, and then, you know, there was, I think we moved to either Fantasia or Mega Bar. There was periods at those places as well. So it lasted a long time. And then, and after a few years, I think we were maybe 3 years at Insanity, maybe something like that. And there was a stage where I'm pretty sure I was just doing the recovery.
Yeah, wow.
And then, you know, I was at Redhead after that. And I also had Better Days at the Carousel, which was pure house music, Sunday session. You know, that started at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah, I actually went to a couple of them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
super house.
That was like super cool.
Yeah.
You know, some people had been out night before and were a bit sideways.
I remember you could lay on the grass. Like I remember laying on the grass at those Better Days events outside the carousel. I don't know if I was allowed to or
that
not.
might have been a bigger event we had there.
Okay.
That one. It was on the outside area. I think we had. Yeah, that was a bit later on, that one.
Yeah, because I rolled in.
DJ Falcon played that gig.
It could have been that gig.
Who else?
Because I remember rolling in after Revies and we were sort of just having a little bit of.
No, that's late. That's a long way later on.
Yeah.
But the original Better Days at the Carousel, it had this, you know, it was just, you know, Melbourne just, there was so many cool people and you know, great people, great hairdressers, the clothing scene was really, you know, Bettina Liano, great girl, you know, women dressing amazingly. But, you know, Bettina was, you know, at the forefront worldwide. You know, she was right on the money.
Yeah.
And, you know, Melbourne women dressed amazingly. You know, her shops were, her main shop there in Chapel Street. Like so many women shop there. And she was on the money ahead
Nailed
of it. Yeah, worldwide. And it was, you know.
Cool time to be Melbourneian.
Oh, it was great.
Yeah, so the Kiss FM thing, right? You know, I know you said we talked about how you started Kiss FM at the beginning of this podcast. How does that start? Like,
so that started. It was Jake actually had met a guy who was involved in community radio, and Jake said to me, "Hey, why don't we do this? You know, with electronic music? Yeah, because they're all playing bad music." So we had our Eric Poppersberg, Jake and myself, put it all together from our office in Chapel Street, which is we called ourselves the Gingerbread Men then. That was our business name, and it was community radio, which would be on for a while. The government wouldn't let you be on air all the time. So sponsorship was hard. Jake worked like tirelessly at that on the sponsorship stuff, and we got it going. But like I said, it was like, I might have been 3 weeks every quarter, something like that. That it was running. So it was on off, which was annoying, and it was really annoying with sponsorship. And I do remember, we were pretty frustrated because the government, they just wouldn't let you, just be on air all the time, even though we're, non-for-profit.
Weird.
Yeah. So, rules and regulations. But I do remember going, I'm pretty sure it was with Jake and Eric, having a meeting at one of the big commercial stations. Could have been Fox. And putting it to them about this electronic music, it's going to blow up. It's going to be the biggest thing. Can we get a show going? Can we get our DJs at, maybe throughout the night? Nah, we're not into dance music. We don't know anything about, you guys are crazy. I just did not know.
Thought it was a fad.
Yeah, because there was a gap between people that knew and people that didn't. There was quite a big gap.
But even when you think about it now, house techno comes in the 80s, now it's at like an all-time peak. It's had ebbs and flows, but it doesn't really get massively mainstream until probably the 2000s, really. So it had a long, long time of like kind of being the undertow of Australia's dance scene.
Well, the problem is when you got these people that have no idea running radio stations.
Or not willing to have an idea either.
And they won't go out on a little limb, which wasn't, you could see what was happening in the UK. And it was all, excuse me, it was all becoming, the underground was becoming commercial and, all the radio stations were playing electronic music.
Well, they had all the pirate radio and stuff over there too, right? Because it was all pirate radio in the early days.
Yeah, but then it went over to, commercial radio. So, but Australia is had been such a rock country.
Yeah.
They had the blinkers on.
Didn't want to hear about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And so, like, how long you guys do that for? And then do you still have that, or did you pass it on?
No, we passed it on. Tim Byrne is the man there now, and he's done an amazing job at Kiss FM.
Kiss My Grass too. They were big events back in the day.
Yeah, we did Kiss My Grass.
So you were involved when Kiss My Grass was on?
At the start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they were like, tickets were like $20 or something. It was silly. I remember watching DJ Hellraiser close their main stage at Kiss My Grass, and it was like, I don't know how many people used to do there, but it was a massive event.
Yeah, so Tim is the driver of all that, and Tim's done an amazing job, and still running today. And they got the license to run 24/7, so it was fantastic. And I feel very proud to have been a part of it.
For sure, and
to help the belt. I think it really helped the Melbourne scene too.
Well, you probably wouldn't know this, but a lot of the artists from my generation blew up from Kiss FM. So we used to break artists on Kiss FM back in the mid-2000s. We'd have them on there. We had a show called The Loud Show at the time.
Yep.
And then we would get everyone to listen in. Will Sparks is one of them that blew up on there.
Yep.
So they started on Kiss FM. So the amount of Australian careers that have blown up from that platform in the early days, it spans generations.
Well, the great thing about Kiss it covered lots of different genres of music. So people started to listen to stuff they've never heard of before. Because I was kind of connected. We always had interviews from people all around the world. This stuff, was all new. It was all fresh.
My favorite part was the locations. They used to always be like above a pub or next to a train station. Like these really cool like spots.
OB.
Down alleyway or whatever. So it felt like underground because you'd roll into these stations, you'd have control. You know, you'd be able to run and do whatever you want, have guests on, play music. There was sort of no rules. People loved it. Everyone listened to it. There was these big events called like Kiss My Grass.
Yeah.
If you're a part of the community, you got to play them. And then second to that was these like underground locations. It felt like you were a part of something bigger, you know, or something really, really fucking underground. So yeah, it was mad. Those days were the best.
No, we're very lucky also to have such great DJs, great people around us, and that all came together. You know, it was a community feel.
Yeah.
As well, just having all those great people and
networking together.
Yeah, because it took a lot.
I can imagine how much it would have took.
Guys like Sean Quinn was amazing in it. I don't know if you know Sean.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Sean had a big part. He's got a great radio voice. Sean. Yeah. So it was an amazing time, and it changed people's thoughts on music.
Yeah.
It wasn't all about AC/DC or those kind of bands.
For sure. And because like I said, they're 100%. So then you said you were kind of finished up at Redhead, you're working there. Is this the part where One Love starts? Like, do you start One Love in that period, or is it still?
Came a few years later. I did it wasn't actually that long later, but a little bit later.
Do you mind starting back at One Love? Anyone in that generation, it's the biggest night, undoubtedly the biggest night. Do you mind starting there and sort of telling the story about how it starts and then I guess where it goes?
Look, I was at Redhead, and the Prince had been trying to get it a Saturday night, but could never go over a few hundred people. And Draw Arez, who ran the Prince, was always on the phone to me. Come on, what are you doing? Da da da. And then Redhead was coming to an end with the reformation of what happened in Albert Park. It's all changed. So you say, okay, I'll come down. I have to make a few changes. This is what I do. I brought Frank Catallery. I said, Frank, I want you to be a part of this. You're the best at artwork, cutting edge artwork. And Julian Gurner as well. I don't know if you know Julian.
No, I don't know. Frank, obviously, yes.
And James, who had already worked at the Prince, was involved. He was, had like a eclectic kind of, the gay scene, plus a lot of St Kilda-ish kind of people. So we came up with a name at my apartment one night. We were all over there, and the rest is history. It went bang.
Why One Love? Like, why was it just, thought it sounded cool at the time? Because obviously it's like, you think of house music and that explosion, One Love's the name that comes with it.
Well, I think in music, you have a look at how many great records have got the word love in it. And it makes people feel, it's a feel good sort of word. And I think that was probably where it
started.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like you go from Insanity, all these different names, Subway, whatever, and then like One Love, it's sort of it's an outlier. Like it doesn't follow that same route, and then it kind of starts a whole brand new generation.
And Frank's artwork, cutting edge, like he was one of he knew about the club scene, he knew what was going on. He knew music, he could play music, but he was at the forefront of the artwork.
And the thing is too, like you look at that brand, like you can see it. You say the name One Love, you can see the artwork, you can see the covers of the CDs. Like it's so like telling that brand.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure Frank had done like the Bertuniano's, logo. He was a logo king at the time, with many brands around town of just all different types of things. So he knew how to brand something. And between, myself and Julian Guys, guys like Nick Foley and Evan Sear, Sam Dage. We put this great team of people together, and it was like a new. For me, it was like a new era of what was going. The young people who had learnt some from their parents even about the electronic music and the music scene. It had just gone to a different level. People had phones, and yeah.
So this is the story you want to know. So I sort of briefly touched on the phone the other day to you, but for me, I like dance music, and I was like, didn't really know where to go. I came from the country originally.
Right.
And then I went to a couple of clubs, and I'm like, this is not what it's cracked up to be. I happened to be at Marquee one night, which is shithole, but anyway. And then a friend had called a friend and said, we're at this place called Onelove in Prince. So I'd never heard of it. As you said before, there was no like, the only way you could find stuff was Beat Magazine back then.
Yeah.
But it's like, it was word of mouth still then. Like, so I'd never heard of these clubs, these underground clubs, and like living in the country especially, we had no resource to it. So, and then I knew hardstyle and hard techno, but it just wasn't for me. And I remember going down there and we waited in line, we got in, I walked up those stairs and I'll never forget it. This is why my career starts at this exact moment. I walk up and I walk into the Prince band room, and where it says Prince, you had, I believe, Onelove there. There's the balls, there's all the people dressed up. Everyone was wearing leopard print, bright pink colors, like they were wearing the high top shoes. And that was the moment where I was like, this is what I'm gonna do for the rest of my life. Like, I know that's insane, but I was like, I've found home. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it, but I was like, I've found home. This is something I didn't know existed, but all I wanna know is everything for the rest of my life. I wanna be involved in this. And that's where my journey begins, is at Onelove at Prince. So Thank you so much for that.
Well, there's a lot of people you can thank. It's not just me. It was a great team effort.
Yeah.
And, I think in any business you do today, it's not just, it's just not yourself. You got to have the right people around you. And I've been lucky enough a few times to have fantastic people around me.
Yep.
To make things happen. It's a team effort. Running a club night, and especially when you're starting from scratch, and and you're not actually the club owner. You're the the promoter coming in and telling the owner to step back, let us do our thing.
Yeah, true.
It wasn't a real easy thing, especially in the early days. They kind of didn't quite get it.
Yeah, totally. So, obviously with Onelove, there's fashion, there's music, the whole thing comes from it. It turns into this whole massive thing. You have CDs, you do all that sort of stuff, compilations. But the big thing was the fashion, right? Like the fashion was sort of founded from there. Everyone was copying it. Was that like an accidental, like a beautiful mistake? Or was that something you guys actually tried to generate?
No, we didn't try. That just happened naturally.
Yeah.
That stuff.
And why do you think that happened there? Because that's like one of the biggest. Like the fashion there was really outrageous.
But it was the same thing at Chase's.
Yeah, okay.
It's a generational
thing.
And people being, people want to kind of be cool, that especially like Melbourne had that thing going on that,
We don't copy other people, we do our own thing.
Yeah, and they want to be ahead of what's going on in Queensland or Perth or Sydney or whatever, where, because, it's not like Sydney, they hang out on Bondi Beach.
Yeah, exactly.
We hang out in clubs in Melbourne.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what people did.
Yeah. The underground is like a big part of everyone's life.
It was like, yeah. In Sydney, they went to Bondi.
Some of the careers you broke there, Kaz James, Body Rockers, Andy Murphy, John Course, Grant Smiley, the list goes on. Some of those dudes, like how was it working with them? And how was it watching them blow up and start doing stuff, even doing sound?
They were eager to do well as well. And we let them play what they wanted to. There was no, don't play this, don't play that, where some places did have that sort of, we knew what that, they just did their thing, and I like to see guys like Kaz today, like he's got a great reputation worldwide, plays everywhere, obviously got his regular at Ali Magoo there in Mykonos. But now he's got, he's on the circuit.
Yeah.
And, I'll just skip a little bit. And later on, when I went and helped the Prince out the second time round with James Favour and, a guy like Dom Dollar. I think he was playing like once a month, Dom Dollar, for a small fee.
Now he's generating 200,000 ticket sales in a weekend.
James Favour, I worked with James Favour very closely there. He was a fantastic guys, and I'm so proud of these guys, how well they've done. It's to see young people do so well.
And you've seen so many though. Like that's the thing.
Yeah.
Like there's such a long list of people that have worked under you or with you or beside you who've gone on to actually take over the world. Like that's fucking crazy.
Yeah, look, it was I gotta say when the Body Rockers, I like the way you move, came out, it was just like wow.
Sick tune still.
Oh my God.
TV Rock too, like flaunted that took over all of Australia. Like
that was huge.
That's probably one of the things you could actually if you were to pinpoint when house got big all over Australia, not just Melbourne, it's probably that song.
Yeah. Those sort of things really, those tracks. So yeah, it was an amazing time.
So of all these club nights that you ran, right, that are from the 80s up until the sort of 2010s or whatever they call it now, however the term is there like one moment or one club that's your favourite?
They're favourites in different ways. Like I said earlier, that Subway, it was like something that could have been in New York or in Germany, in Berlin. It had that sort of that underground, like super underground, and back then there was no phones. It's word of mouth. You had to know. You had to be told, hey, get down to this place. It's got to be hard to get in, but just wait, you'll get in,
And another thing with you, with a lot of your venues too, it was hard to get in.
Yeah.
So that was just always a good door guy because that's something that doesn't even exist anymore. Like I'm guessing that was something that you manufactured or you. How did you make the door policies? Because all the venues I went to that you ran, they weren't that easy to get in.
We look at Onelove. Yeah, God, we'd probably knock back 500-600 people a night.
The line used to go. The line used to go from
more.
the line used to go from the front of the club all the way back up to the back around the car park.
No, we had if you haven't got the right look, you're not coming in.
And you used to split groups. I remember walking up with
That's
friends and you'd be like, you four can come in, you two can't. Yeah. And it was like real strict like that. Yeah.
Look, we're very lucky to have great, door people. That was, it's always one of the harder parts because, it's all about the front door, who's coming in.
It's a bit of a dying art now, like a good door guy, like a crowd selector. You probably can't even say it out loud these days because you'd get cancelled. But like that was the backbone of most clubs.
Like a place like the Prince is, or, around 1,000 people cap sort of thing. So, you might, when you're so popular, you might be knocking back 1,000.
Yeah, and you can start to pick who you want in there, right?
No, you do.
And I guess the other thing too is you get good heads in, it causes less trouble, makes the environment better. There's a whole science to it.
And like with Gavin at Razor and Andy Sumter there at 161, longevity. It's all about longevity, and if you want the club to last a long time, you got to be hard on the door, have the right people. You want those what we call the right people talking about it, and the tastemakers. They're the early influencers.
Well, I look at all the clubs that have ran for a very, very long time, and what's the difference between them and every other one is a strict door policy, and they stick to it, and they don't divert. They don't just sort of cave in, and they run for fucking, look, 161's coming up on 30 years.
Yeah.
So you actually did a recovery again. You got back into the recovery scene. You did ping pong.
Yeah, I had a break, and then Andy Sumter was working downstairs in the pub at the Prince, and I was up at the club, and he said, "Oh, can you help us out? Their Saturday night was finishing, 3:30, 4 o'clock. It was pretty much done on a Saturday, and I had at Onelove at 5 o'clock in the morning, again 700 or 800 people, maybe 1,000, and I said, "Yep, I think I could do something. So I took over from about 5 in the morning at 161, and that ran till 4 p.m. most days. And this was before the Breakfast Club had started.
Wasn't even a thought, yeah.
Wasn't even a thought.
It's probably going back, it's probably 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I did that with a guy called Anthony Gadsden because it was, because I was running nights at night and then going there all day. So it was a long session for me. So it was always good to have someone else to work with, help set up before you got there.
And ping pong was even more, like that was harder to get in.
That was cool.
Because that was like,
pong.
everyone would go to Prince that already got scanned through the door, and then you had to go there and it was a smaller room and you had to go through the same door policy again.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Same, a lot of the same people. Most people knew me, or, a lot knew Anthony as well. And, guys like Foley and Daniel Vid, all those. Daniel Vid played some great music back then. And it went for a long time. It was really, really good.
Another iconic club night.
Yeah, you'd have 300, 400 people there at 6, 7 in the morning trying to get in. And, there was a lot of rock stars. There was a lot of, it was...
the who's who of Australia really trying to get through.
What's that?
The who's who of Australia trying to get through.
It was. And, and sometimes they weren't in the greatest condition, so you had to knock them back.
So working around clubs for so long, is there any sort of like a crazy story that you look back on? And I know you would have seen so much crazy shit. Is there one kind of crazy story that stands out? You think, fuck, I can't believe that actually happened?
Yeah, there's some stuff, but maybe I'd rather not talk about.
Keep it off the record, and that's completely fine. I totally get that.
That was interesting. And then, like, I remember we were still running One Love, but, as you know, we had a lot of international DJs. The fees were getting higher. The club scene was getting, there was, music was changing, guys like the bloody Beetroots coming through. And, we all had a chat about, should we do a festival? If we can't, it's time we did that as well, because the club was getting harder and harder because the scene was changing. So,
and this is the creation of Stereosonic.
The creation of Stereosonic. So we did just Melbourne the first year. And it was really good. I was like, oh, wow. And we debated for a long time, should we go interstate? Should we do the country? So we decided on doing the country. And I'm pretty sure that first Stereosonic was the only one I went to in Melbourne, because when we had Adelaide going the same day as Melbourne, I'd run Adelaide, and the other boys are in Melbourne, and then we'd all meet up in Brisbane and then do Perth. So it became the next phase. And
that was one of the biggest festivals to ever touch the shores in electronic music.
Yeah. And
so what actually made you guys, make the name Stereosonic, and the team that was behind that is fucking unbelievable. What made you get that team together?
I've known Richie since he was a kid, and Simon Coyle.
So Richie's Hardware, Simon Coyle, he was
at Hardware too.
He was at Hardware too at the point, okay.
Yeah, at that time.
So it was Hardware and One Love coming together.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, having great people
at the right time.
Bringing a team together at the right time, it just went bang. We all brought our piece. Great, Frank did. I'm pretty sure Frank did the first artwork, and Richie's great knowledge of the techno scene, and same with Simon, and he knew all the breaks and beats guys as well, and we'd been doing One Love Interstate as well. I don't know if you
Yeah, in
remember
Sydney,
that.
I remember
We were
you
doing
guys
touring and
I remember
CD
that.
launches, all that.
Doing stuff down the Conti. I remember them too.
So in that period interstate, we'd actually got a lot of good relationships interstate as well with people on the ground. So we had, and I don't know if you know, I had a little club in Byron Bay called La La Land. So I was obviously close to Brisbane. So I had a team of people on the East Coast, and I'd spent a lot of time running One Love in Sydney. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I remember all this.
Yeah, so we had a big promoter team in Sydney. We had people up the East Coast. And an old friend of mine, Andy, over rest in peace as well, had WA. He's running the clubs in Perth. And, we contacted him. And then there was also rest in peace, Paul Glenn. I know a lot of people have died in this story, but
yeah, I know.
And Paul Glenn over in Adelaide, and they all had teams of people we could rely on to sell tickets all around the country. So it gave us confidence to go interstate with Stereosonic.
And that was a successful move, obviously. You guys had massive people. You had guys like, I know Bloody Beatrix, you had Carl Cox, you had, I'm pretty sure you had Axwell, not Axwell, sorry.
Oh, yeah. We had it.
You had Avicii too. I remember seeing Avicii,
Yeah.
And then what kind of numbers were you doing towards the end? Like,
oh no, it was very big.
Hundreds of thousands of people across the.
Yeah, it was. Look, I do remember one period there when we've been to Miami, which I'll get. There's another story about Miami I will tell you about too that I was remembered today. But I remember and I'd caught a vibe on this crew called LMFAO. There was this track I'd heard. I said to the guys, these guys are going to be big. I reckon they're going to be real big. Anyway, so we booked them for not a lot of money. And by the time, that was in like March. And by the time we came around to Stereosonic time, late November, early December, the track had blown up crazy around, they were the biggest thing. And that year, I'm pretty sure Avicii played that year too, and he just got the festival just went to this next level of wow. It was crazy.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Some of the lineups is just absolutely mammoth. Like you couldn't even get one of those artists these days, let alone all of them on the same bill.
Yeah. No. So it was that was an amazing time. Lots of great people. A lot of people, I'm quite friendly with still today, even though I'm not in the business at the moment. But they were just amazing times. But just going back to that Miami scene. I remember going to one of the first early conferences over there, Winter Music Conference. I went to the first Ultra. Hardly anyone there. I remember standing with Junior Sanchez and looking around like, what's going on here? And, look what the Ultras turned into today. They kept at it. And, I think that's any young promoters or people in business, if you got the feel for something, it might not work. It's not going to happen overnight, but you keep at it, and you believe it will eventually happen. So that's what happened at Ultra. There was no one there.
Yeah, that's one of the. It's the biggest
walking around, like, my God, there was a club scene. The club scene was happening in Miami, but it wasn't resonating to a festival.
Yeah.
That was early.
Crazy.
I can just Junior Sanchez, I could still remember, like, we're looking at each other like, ugh.
Pete, so we are now, and when we spoke about this, so this is going to be the first ever part 2 episode I do. I know you're going to head back to Byron Bay. Currently the cyclone, hopefully maybe we can put it in before you go, but we'll see how it goes. We are going to do the first ever part 2 on Danny Reds because your story is so fucking long. I want to talk about the sale of Stereosonic. I want to talk about the compilation with Onelove. I want to go back through some other history and artists that you've worked with. La La Land, the whole lot. So there's so much more to go. So you are going to be the official first ever part 2. We're going to end now, guys. Keep watching. Make sure you subscribe to my channel, which I've never said on the podcast either, because you're going to miss part 2 if you don't miss out. And this Stereosonic and then the stuff that comes afterwards, if you think this is crazy, it's just getting started. So thanks, Pete. I'll see you for part 2.
See you soon.
Legend.